Welcome to Akhand Yoga, the first institute impeccable wisdom. Thalamus, the sensory relay center. Divyank, the walking, talking encyclopedia. My mission, the impeccable wisdom, knowing which everything is fully known. My greatest discovery, Divyank, the divine design of nature, with which the perfect objects are designed and created. The Divyank is the reward of 60 years of integrated education. Let's understand the human brain parts. Human brain can be divided into three main components: forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Forebrain means front brain, which further subdivided into telencephalon and diencephalon. Telencephalon means the further away from the center. It consists of cerebral cortex, and normally we talk of 8 lobes of cerebral cortex, 4 pairs. But according to Devyang, there should be 10 lobes or 5 pairs of lobes. And they are motor cortex, parietal cortex, occipital cortex, and temporal cortex. Added to that is the insular cortex, which is directly and indirectly associated with the autonomic nervous system. I have already spoken about it. It's just a review that there are 10 cerebral lobes. Basal ganglion, which is responsible for programming and planning of the movement or motor actions, is also associated with telencephalon and placed anteriorly, close to frontal cortex. Then you have a limbic system which is surrounding the thalamus and hypothalamus, and this particular system is responsible for emotions. Now diencephalon is thalamus and hypothalamus. These two work in unison with each other, are in the center of forebrain or the top brain. Then second layer is midbrain or mesencephalon, which is divided in tectum and tegmentum. We'll not go into details of these two aspects, but let's say it's a midbrain. The hindbrain is of metencephalon, which is cerebellum and pons. Pons is continuation with midbrain. Cerebellum lies behind. And then you have medulla oblongata, which is the lower part. For that matter, midbrain, pons, and medulla oblongata form brainstem, are the part of reptilian brain. The limbic system is a part of mammalian brain. And on top you have primate brain. I think we have already discussed that. And then now let's see this particular concept in my own picture, which I had designed long years back. The complete human brain, as right in front on top, you can see the motor cortex, which is before central sulcus. When parietal cortex is somatosensory, is behind the central sulcus or postcentral gyrus. Then you have temporal lobe, and then you have occipital lobe. These 4 pairs, which everybody talks about. But right in the middle, I have written about an insular cortex, which is associated with central autonomic nervous system. I have also shown the location of basal ganglion and limbic system in this brain. Thalamus and hypothalamus have been shown with red color right in the middle. Thalamus in the backside and hypothalamus slightly anteriorly. Thalamus is surrounded by the third ventricle. Then you have midbrain below that. Then you have pons. Then you have medulla oblongata. And behind the pons is cerebellum. So the classified approach of the brain. Most significant parts have also been shown where do they find their place or where they are located. So I'm sure gross neuroanatomy of brain is very clear to us at this particular juncture. Now let's be a little more specific, come to the thalamus, its location and association. You can see there are 2 egg-shaped structures right on top, which are further divided into three parts with a white matter. White matter are the tracts of thalamus, where others is a gray matter where the nuclei are involved. So there are two sets of the thalamus and which is right on top of hypothalamus. And posterior you can see cerebellum. So left, right, and myelinated axons, or you say white matter are tracked, you can see in between. So I'm sure from gross to little more subtle. Let's go and further detail. Now you can see there are two sets, left and right. Now we have seen the right part slightly tilted to say what are the different parts. As you can see, there is a front part called anterior nuclear group. And you also see reticular nucleus right at the bottom. These are anterior parts of thalamus. Then you have medial, you have two parts, dorsal nuclei as well as ventral nuclei. The dorsal nuclei, you can see they are slightly behind, the ventral mean front. Anterior is completely in front, ventral is slightly behind anterior, and dorsal is behind that. Now, major dorsal nuclei are medial, lateral dorsal, and lateral posterior. There are three sets. Similarly, ventral nuclei also have three: ventral anterior, ventral lateral, and ventral posterior lateral. So now this is little more subtle neuroanatomy of thalamus. Behind the posterior part, you have pulvinar, right, the green color on top. But underneath, you see medial geniculate body and lateral geniculate body. These two bodies play a very, very important role as far as yoga is concerned. Lateral geniculate body carries the fibers associated with vision, and then they go to visual cortex or occipital. Medial geniculate body carries the fibers from ears for hearing and go to temporal cortex or auditory cortex. So now we can understand step by step, gross, little more detail, little more detail. Now let's see the connections of thalamus. Anterior part, as you can see in the posterior part, is the fibers go to motor cortex. That means anterior part by and large is associated with motor activity. BPL, ventro-posterior lateral nuclei, go to somatosensory cortex. They are associated with touch, ascending tracts, and this information goes to parietal cortex or somatosensory cortex. Then pulvinar, they go to posterior association areas. The information which comes from the body and other things is finally carried to associated areas, because in the brain you have primary areas, secondary areas, as well as associated areas. Vision has a primary as well as secondary. Even auditory has a primary and secondary. Then you have associated areas, and right on top you can see mediodorsal nucleus. On both the sides, those fibers go to prefrontal cortex. That means they are also associated with motor activity. Then you have medial geniculate body, auditory as I told you, go to temporal, and lateral geniculate body to visual cortex of the occipital region. So I think now connections of these sets of nuclei is also well known. Gross to subtle, then different nuclei, and now different connections or association, how the information is passed on. So now let's go to the next. Major connections. We have 5 normal senses which I have spoken about it, and I also talked about 6th sense as well as 7th sense. Now let's revise that to understand how exactly they are carried to thalamus, and from thalamus how the information goes to cortical level or neocortical level. The first sensation which I spoke about is Shruti, that means hearing. That information is carried by ears, eighth cranial nerve, corticovestibular nerve, to thalamus. Equilibrium also is associated inner ear. That information also goes to thalamus. So, eighth cranial nerve carry the information about sound and equilibrium to thalamus, and they are associated with the first bhuta, akash bhuta. Second, let's talk about eyes. Eyes carry information from eyes through optic nerve to lateral geniculate body to thalamus, and from thalamus information is carried to the visual cortex. That pathway which we have already shown is also shown in this picture right in the middle, how it goes from eyes to thalamus, lateral geniculate to thalamus, thalamus to visual cortex. Now, two sensations which are chemical in nature. Olfaction is with the smell, and those fibers receptors are in the nose, and olfactory receptors carry information to the bulb tract to olfactory cortex for perception. These fibers do not go to thalamus directly at all, but they are associated with the hypothalamus, and hypothalamus is further associated with this. They work like a circuit, Papez circuit, for the perception of smell along with taste, and association takes place, so that all the information from different sides finally are analyzed by thalamus. We are going to talk about it when we come to the function part of it. Now, as far as tongue is concerned, the taste is concerned, anterior two-thirds of the tongue, taste sensations are carried by cauda tempora or the facial nerve to nucleus tractus solitarius in the brainstem, and posterior one-third or 38.196 through glossopharyngeal to also to medulla oblongata, brainstem, nucleus tractus, and then they go to thalamus. So, touch sensation, somatic senses throughout the body are carried through the ascending tract to thalamus and then to parietal lobe. So, this way now you can see all the sensory information from all over the body through the special senses of eyes, hearing, taste, smell, and touch is carried to thalamus. So from there it distributes. So hence we can call thalamus not only a relay center, it could be a highly trained super secretary of any organization which gets all the information there, then segregates separately and allocates the information to different departments where it is to be required. So that the role played by thalamus is very, very important. If thalamus is strong, healthy, you can have perfect sensation, perception, and adequate action, and we can be perfectly healthy without any particular problem. From that way, thalamus becomes very important organ to be understood completely. So now that we have spoken about gross anatomy, subtle anatomy, nuclei, their association with other connections, now let's take to the next stage. Let's see what we get. But before going to the next stage, let me emphasize that posterior part of thalamus has got lateral geniculate nucleus responsible for vision and medial geniculate, and they are connected in the center through massa intermedia. That means these two sensations are so important. They are also closely related to each other directly itself, not independently to that. And that integration between vision and hearing, audio visual, takes place in thalamus itself. But of course, they also go to associated areas, and as a result, things are much better. So understanding this particular picture again and again is very important, how lateral geniculate body for vision and medial geniculate body are associated, and both the sides are equally interconnected to bring synchronization with hearing and vision. Now let's take to the major functions of thalamus. Having spoken about neuroanatomy of thalamus, different nuclei, their associations, their connections. Now we can see how different parts are associated through thalamus. Entire integration takes place. So what are the 10 or 11 prime functions of thalamus? Let's take one by one. First one, as I've been saying from the day first itself, it is a sensory relay center. All the information of all from internal world and external world is carried to the thalamus and mass. And then thalamus is able to analyze things, evaluate, and pass on the information to the appropriate or associated areas for execution of whatever function has to be done or whatever reaction or response has to be done. So sensory relay center is the most important aspect of thalamus. Second, integration of all the sensory impulses. This also shows that in thalamus, all the sensory impulses come so that you can see the association with all the five senses. All the five, I'm making it very clear, for all the five senses, information is carried to thalamus. Sense, you can say, crude center of perception or sensation is thalamus. I would go to the extent of saying indriya and mind are associated between the ascending nerves of a sensory component coming up to thalamus, and thalamus could also be the center of the mind, concrete mind, which can take concrete decisions. This is what it is. So right up to emotional mind and concrete mind, all the decisions are taken right up to thalamus by Allah. So let's say it is a center of mind, fluctuating mind otherwise. Information of the mind is coming to analyze and then learn what to filter it out from mind, concrete mind to intellect, buddhi, and then go to intuition, higher level, 6th and 7th. But up to this is five senses, perception, concrete mind, emotions, and this is there. So this is very important from yoga point of view. Then central integration of motor action function also takes place in thalamus. As I told you, for reflex arch and reflex action to work, there has to be integration between sensory component and the motor component, and in between the integration should take place in the gray matter. If it takes in the central nervous system in the spinal cord, similarly in the brain also integration can take. So there are nuclei which are associated with sensory and motor both in thalamus. So I want to say it is sensory relay center, but it also has the functions related to motor functions, and those nuclei are also there in thalamus. Let it not be only sensory, even motor integration takes place. There are nuclei associated with certain motor activities in thalamus. The next one, the role of arousal and alertness is also closely associated with thalamus, and that I would say at this juncture, it is associated with reticular formation of the brain stem, which helps in bringing alertness from sleep to wakefulness. And those fibers I'll be showing in the next, how they play a role in bringing awareness, alertness, and making us go beyond the mind version to much higher levels of consciousness. Okay. Now, sixth, the role of emotional. As I told you, emotional mind, emotional fluctuation are also associated with thalamus. That is, its association, close association with the limbic system. Okay, that clear? Now, when it comes to the question of languages, thalamus plays very important roles because understanding different connotations in the different aspects of secondary, third, tertiary aspects of the language. Language has got a vocal thing, it has got a structure, it has got many dimensions. But all those dimensions, to great an extent, are associated in thalamus because information comes to thalamus first, and then thalamus is able to recognize different aspects of language so that we can understand language much better. Eighth is synchronization of electroencephalogram. That means electrical activity of the brain is carried the information from reticular formation to thalamus, and that sensory component is further carried to subcortical structures. Electroencephalogram or EEG is nothing but summation of action potential of electrical activity of the subcortical level to the cortical level and picked up from the brain. This synchronization helps. Normally, axons have action potential in millivolts, but higher brain, neocortical, outer three layers or fourth layer, normally electrical activity is in microvolts. But if you can increase the power down, if you can increase it to millivolts, as a result, you can activate even third, second, and fourth layer of neocortex and thereby integrate the whole nervous system and be in tune with nature. And that is where intellect or intuition awakens them when you are able to come to that level of understanding which is higher than thalamus. And that activation, quote in quote, in my opinion, soul and higher soul play an important role for sixth and seventh sense. Integration takes place. Then ninth is integration of somatic and visceral functions. Somatic means body functions. Visceral means internal organ functions. Internal organs and this their integration take place. As a result, we can avoid psychosomatic disorders and lead a much better, healthier life. 10th is a center for sexual behavior or sexual stimulation. Because sex is also sensory in nature, that information goes and what kind of response the body should have. That also, those centers are also with thalamus. And center for higher reflex action means at spinal cord you can have single segmental reflex as you see in pain and temperature case. Then you can have intersegmental reflex, then more areas of the body are involved and more segments of the spinal cord come to play a role. It's called intersegmental reflex. But then you also have suprasegmental reflex, means when higher centers in the brain come to play a role, and that is what higher reflex. Single will be sensory component, spinal cord, interneuron, and this. But here sensory dorsal ganglion, sensory nerve, spinal cord, and then information going up to the higher level in the brain, and then associate up to thalamus, and then higher, and then bringing a longer reflex loop, which brings much more coordinated reflex action. So other touch, fine touch, other touch is actually higher reflex action, whereas pain and temperature is segmental lower reflex. I'm sure now you can understand the role of thalamus in both sensory component, motor component, associated behavior, emotional behavior, mental behavior, intellectual behavior, even going beyond. It's all based. So if you can keep your nerve thalamus intact, you can make optimum use of 100 billion neural cells, all the memory cell, because all the integration coordination can take place in that. And that is where I would say this center is very, very important. Now, this particular picture is just to show you all the information from the body is carried to reticular formation in the brainstem, and from there it goes to thalamus, and from thalamus radiation can take place to the entire cerebral cortex. So in other words, integrating thalamus full and making sure of the sensory, motor and associated component, you can integrate the entire nervous system into one, and that is what yoga does, and that is what Akhand Yoga has helped me to produce alpha frequency throughout the brain with eyes on up and close. So I'm now sure, Pete, thalamus is very important. It's a sensory relay center. It's a super secretary, very intelligent secretary, knows what to do and what not to do, and giving an awareness of this particular center is very, very important, and is sitting right on top of Vigyan Chakra or hypothalamus, and upper and lower action can take place. So that way, I think anyone who can master this particular thing, which I can quote in quote say, is a Bindu Chakra. Now, everything should come, so I don't think I would like to make it very lengthy. So let me not talk much about this particular picture with respect to thalamus. Let me just say thank you very much for kind listening, and I'm sure if you can understand the sequence step by step, you have so much of perfect information for your own physical health and reflex action to make sure that homeostasis is normal, equilibrium is normal, equanimity as mind is, and you go beyond the mind to intellect and higher. Thalamus plays a very, very important role. So thank you very much for everything. Thank you.